My friends, I want to speak to you today about something that troubles the hearts of many. It is a question that has echoed through the ages. Why does God delay? Why does he sometimes seem silent when we cry out to him? Why does it feel as if he is holding back our blessing, our breakthrough, our deliverance? If you have ever wrestled with these thoughts, let me assure you, God's delays are not his denials. The Lord has not forgotten you. He has not turned his face away. He is not ignoring your prayers. He is Joseph, a young man with dreams of greatness. He saw visions of his future, but before the dream could become reality, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and wrongfully imprisoned. For years, it seemed as if everything in his life was moving in the wrong direction. But God had a plan. Every trial, every setback was positioning him for the moment when he would be lifted from the prison to the palace, from suffering to sovereignty. God's delay was not a denial, it was preparation. Think of Abraham, to whom God promised a son. Year after year passed, and still there was no child. He and Sarah grew old, and the hope of God's promise must have seemed impossible. But my friends, God does not forget what he has spoken. At the appointed time, not Abraham's time, not Sarah's time, but God's time, Isaac was born. The promise was fulfilled. And what about Lazarus? When he was sick, his sisters sent for Jesus, expecting him to come immediately. But Jesus delayed. Lazarus died. It must have seemed like the end. But Jesus knew what he was doing. He wasn't planning a healing. He was planning a resurrection. When he stood before the tomb and cried, "Lazarus, come forth," death itself had to let go. What seemed like a delay was actually a greater miracle in the making. And I tell you today, the same God who was faithful to Joseph, to Abraham, to Lazarus, is faithful to you. You may be facing trials that seem unbearable. You may feel like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling, but God's delays are not his denials. Your breakthrough is coming. Do not give up. Do not lose heart. The enemy would love for you to believe that God has abandoned you, that he is not listening, that your situation will never change. But I am here to tell you, God is never late. He is never early. He is always right on time. Trust in his perfect timing. Keep believing, keep praying, keep pressing on, because when God moves, he moves suddenly. The door that has been shut for years can swing open in an instant. The burden that has weighed you down can be lifted in a moment. The victory that has seemed distant can become reality in the blink of an eye. Your breakthrough is coming. Your miracle is on the way. Hold on to your faith, for the God who promised is faithful. He has not forgotten you, and when his time comes, oh, what a glorious day that will be. My friends, I want you to hear this deep in your heart. God's delays are not his denials. He is not punishing you by making you wait. He is preparing you. He is refining you. He is molding you into the person who can receive the very thing you have been praying for. When God gives a promise, he also prepares the vessel. So often we want instant answers. We want immediate results. But God is not on our schedule. He operates in the realm of eternity. What seems like delay to us is divine timing to him. His ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are beyond our comprehension. Look at Moses. He was called to be a deliverer, yet he spent 40 years in the wilderness before he ever stood before Pharaoh. 40 years of waiting, 40 years of wondering, But when the time was right, God spoke to him from the burning bush and sent him forth with power. What if Moses had given up in year 39? What if he had assumed God had forgotten him? He would have missed the miracle. Maybe today you feel like you are in the wilderness. Maybe you've been waiting for what seems like forever. Maybe you've been praying and fasting, seeking God, and still the doors have not opened. I want to remind you, Moses waited, Joseph waited, David waited, even Jesus waited until the appointed time to step into his ministry. And if the Son of God himself submitted to God's timing, how much more should we trust in his perfect plan? God is not in a hurry, but he is never late. He is never caught off guard. He does not forget his promises. Every delay has a purpose. Every season of waiting is shaping you for what is to come. I think of Hannah, who longed for a child. Year after year, she cried out to God, but her arms remained empty. She was ridiculed, she was mocked, she was heartbroken. But she did not stop praying. She did not stop believing. And in God's perfect time, he gave her Samuel, not just a child, but a prophet, a leader, a mighty man of God. What if Hannah had stopped praying too soon? What if she had given up in her sorrow? She would have missed the blessing that was coming. Some of you are standing on the edge of your miracle, but you don't even realize it. The enemy wants you to grow weary. He wants you to quit just before the breakthrough. He wants you to walk away from the promise. But I am telling you today, hold on. Do not give up. Do not turn back. Keep your faith strong. Keep pressing in, because just when it seems darkest, just when you think you cannot go on, that is when God moves. That is when he shows up and does what only he can do. There's a time and a season for everything under heaven, and there is a time for your breakthrough. There is a time for your healing. There is a time for your restoration. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow, but it is coming. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. I think of the children of Israel. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey, a place of abundance and blessing. But before they could enter, they had to go through the wilderness. They had to wait. And some of them lost faith in the waiting. Some of them doubted God's promise. They complained, they turned away, and because of their unbelief, they missed out on what God had for them. My friends, do not let doubt rob you of your promise. Do not let impatience steal your miracle. Do not let the enemy whisper lies into your heart. God has not forgotten you. If he said it, he will do it. If he promised it, he will fulfill it. Maybe you have been waiting for healing. Maybe you have been waiting for restoration in your family. Maybe you have been believing for financial breakthrough, and the enemy has tried to tell you it will never happen. But I am here to declare, God is faithful. He is a promise-keeping God. Do not let your circumstances dictate your faith. Do not let the delays make you doubt. Do not let the waiting cause you to waver. Stand firm. Hold on. Keep praying. Keep believing. Because when the time comes, when the moment arrives, when God moves, nothing and no one can stop it. Look at the walls of Jericho. God told Joshua that victory was coming, but first the people had to march. Day after day, they walked around those walls. Can you imagine how they felt? Each day, nothing happened. Each day, the walls stood firm, but they did not stop. They did not quit. They kept going. And on the seventh day, at the appointed time, when they lifted their voices in praise, the walls came crashing down. Some of you are on day 6. You have been marching. You have been believing. But you do not see the results yet. Do not stop now. Keep marching. Keep praising. Keep believing, because your 7th day is coming. The walls that have stood in your way will fall. The obstacles that have blocked your path will crumble. The doors that have been shut will open. God's delays are not his denials. He is not ignoring you. He is positioning you. He is preparing you. He is making sure that when the breakthrough comes, you are ready to receive it. And sometimes, my friends, God delays because he has something better in store. Sometimes what we are asking for is too small compared to what he wants to give us. Sometimes he closes one door so he can open a bigger one. They had followed him, they had believed in him, but now he was gone. 3 days passed and all seemed lost. Their hopes were shattered, their faith was shaken. But what they didn't realize was that the greatest miracle of all was about to happen. Jesus wasn't staying in that tomb. He was about to rise. And when he did, he brought salvation to all who would believe. Some of you feel like you are in that waiting period between the cross and the resurrection. You feel like your dreams have died, like your hope has been buried. But I am telling you, hold on, Sunday is coming. Resurrection is coming. The promise is not dead. God is about to move in ways greater than you can imagine. And when your breakthrough comes, you will see that the waiting was not in vain. You will see that every tear, every prayer, every moment of faithfulness was worth it. You will see that God was working all along, even when you couldn't see it. Do not be discouraged. Do not grow weary. Do not let the enemy steal your hope. God is on the throne. He is in control. He knows the plans he has for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. Your breakthrough is coming. Your miracle is on the way. Keep the faith. Stand firm. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And know that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. And when the time comes, when the promise is fulfilled, when the breakthrough arrives, you will look back and say, God was faithful all along. You will see that his timing was perfect. You will see that he never left you, never abandoned you, never forgot you. And when that moment comes, may your testimony be a light to others. May your faith be strengthened. May your life be a witness to the goodness of God, because what he is about to do in your life will not only bless you, it will glorify him. Hold on, my friends. Do not waver. Do not doubt. God's delays are not his denials. Your breakthrough is coming. There are moments in life when the silence of God feels overwhelming. You pray, you cry out, and yet heaven seems quiet. You wonder if your prayers have been heard, if your tears have been noticed, if your faithfulness has been in vain. But let me tell you today, God hears every prayer. He sees every tear. He knows every sacrifice you have made, and he is not ignoring you. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things in ways you cannot yet understand. Think of Daniel, a man of prayer, a man of faith. He sought God earnestly, yet for 21 days there was no answer. The heavens seemed closed. But what Daniel did not know was that the moment he prayed, God had already sent the answer. There was a battle in the spiritual realm, a war being fought in the unseen. The delay was not because God had denied his request. It was because forces of darkness were trying to hinder the blessing. But at the appointed time, the answer came, and victory was revealed. Some of you have been praying for a long time, and the answer has not yet arrived. But do not be discouraged. Do not believe the lie that God is not listening. He has already set things in motion. What you have been praying for has already been dispatched. Just because you do not see it yet does not mean it is not on the way. Keep praying. Keep believing. Keep standing in faith. Because just like Daniel, your answer is coming. The enemy will do everything in his power to make you give up before the breakthrough. He will plant doubt in your mind, whispering that nothing is changing. He will make circumstances appear worse, trying to convince you that your faith is in vain. But let me remind you, the darkest hour comes just before the dawn. The moment when things seem most hopeless is often the moment right before God moves. Think of the Israelites standing at the Red Sea. Behind them, the armies of Pharaoh were approaching. Before them, an impassable sea stretched as far as the eye could see. They were trapped, Fear gripped their hearts. It seemed like the end. But what they did not realize was that God had already made a way, even though they could not see it yet. And at the appointed time, the waters parted, and they walked through on dry ground. What seemed like an impossible situation became the stage for one of the greatest miracles in history. Some of you are standing at your own Red Sea. You feel trapped. The enemy is closing in. The way forward seems impossible. But do not be afraid. God has already prepared the way. The waters are about to part. What seems like a delay is actually a setup for your deliverance. And when God moves, he moves suddenly. One moment Joseph was in prison, forgotten and abandoned. The next moment he was standing before Pharaoh, being promoted to the second most powerful position in Egypt. One moment the disciples were afraid, locked in a room, mourning the death of Jesus. The next moment he stood in their midst, alive and victorious. One moment Bartimaeus was a blind beggar on the side of the road. The next moment he was healed, his eyes opened, his life transformed. That is the power of God. That is the nature of his breakthroughs. They may seem delayed, but when they come, they happen in an instant. And when your breakthrough comes, it will not just be enough, it will be more than enough. It will be pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It will be a blessing that overflows. Look at Job. He lost everything, his wealth, his family, his health. His friends accused him. His own wife told him to give up. He had every reason to believe that God had abandoned him. But even in his suffering, Job remained faithful. He held on to his trust in God. And when his breakthrough came, it was greater than anything he could have imagined. God restored to him double what he had lost. His latter days were more blessed than his former days. I tell you today, your latter days will be greater. The suffering you have endured, the trials you have faced, the battles you have fought, they will not be wasted. God is a God of restoration. He does not just bring back what was lost. He multiplies it. He gives back in greater measure. Some of you have been through years of struggle. You have faced disappointments, setbacks, heartbreaks. You have felt the weight of discouragement pressing on your soul. But I want you to lift your eyes today, because your breakthrough is coming. Your restoration is on the way. The delay is not a denial. It is divine preparation. God is not just answering your prayers, he is exceeding them. He is not just bringing you through, he is setting you up for something greater. What the enemy meant for evil, God is turning for good. The pain you have endured is producing something in you that is priceless. Your faith has been strengthened. Your character has been refined. And when the time comes, when the doors open, you will step into a blessing that is far greater than anything you could have imagined. Think of Peter. He had walked with Jesus, witnessed miracles, seen the power of God firsthand. And yet, in a moment of weakness, he denied his Lord 3 times. The weight of failure must have been unbearable. He must have thought that his ministry was over, that he had ruined his calling. But Jesus did not see Peter as a failure. Jesus saw him as a man in process, a man who was being refined for a greater purpose. After the resurrection, Jesus restored Peter. He called him back. And Peter, the same man who had once been afraid to acknowledge Christ, became a bold preacher of the gospel. On the day of Pentecost, he stood before thousands and proclaimed the truth, and 3,000 souls were saved. His greatest failure became the backdrop for his greatest calling. Some of you have made mistakes. Some of you have fallen short, and the enemy has tried to convince you that it is over, that you have missed your opportunity, that God cannot use you anymore. But I am here to tell you that is a lie. God is not done with you. He is the God of second chances, the God of restoration, the God who takes what was broken and makes it whole again. Do not let shame hold you back. Do not let regret keep you from moving forward. Your failure is not final. Your past does not define you. God's grace is greater. His mercy is new every morning. And just like Peter, your greatest testimony may come from the very place where you once fell. Look at Paul. He was once a persecutor of the church, a man who stood against the very gospel he would later preach. But God had a plan for him. God took a man who was once his enemy and turned him into one of the greatest apostles in history. Paul endured shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonments, yet he never wavered in his faith. He knew that every trial, every delay, every hardship was working for a greater purpose. My friends, your trials are not meaningless. Your waiting is not wasted. God is working all things together for good. You may not understand it now, but one day you will look back and see the hand of God in every moment. You will see that his timing was perfect. You will see that his plan was greater than yours. And when your breakthrough comes, it will not just be about you. It will be a testimony to others. Your story will inspire those who are still in their season of waiting. Your victory will be proof that God is faithful. So do not give up. Do not let go of your faith. Do not allow the delays to discourage you, because the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who raised Lazarus from the dead, the God who restored Job, who empowered Peter, who transformed Paul, that same God is working in your life right now. And when he moves, when he answers, when he opens the door, you will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was his hand at work. You will see that every delay was for a reason, that every moment of waiting was worth it. Your breakthrough is coming. Hold on, trust in him, because what he has promised, he will surely fulfill. I want you to understand this deep in your soul. God is never late. He is never off schedule. He is never behind. He is always working in the perfect timing of his divine plan. The delays you face are not because he has forgotten you or because he is withholding something good from you. No, he is preparing something greater than you could imagine. Sometimes we become frustrated because we measure time by our own expectations. We set deadlines for God. We tell him when and how he should move. And when things do not happen according to our plans, we begin to doubt, we begin to question, we begin to wonder if he is listening at all. But his ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. If we could see the full picture, we would know that his plan is always better. Look at David. As a young boy, he was anointed to be king. The oil was poured over his head, and the promise was spoken. But after that moment, David did not immediately take the throne. He went back to tending sheep. He went back to the fields. And for years, instead of ruling, he was running. Instead of wearing a crown, he was hiding in caves, fleeing from King Saul, living in exile. Can you imagine the thoughts that must have run through David's mind? Lord, you anointed me. You gave me a promise. Why am I still in this place? Why am I still struggling? Why does it seem like everything is moving in the opposite direction of what you said? But what David did not realize at the time was that the waiting was part of the preparation. The trials were shaping him. The challenges were molding him into the man who could carry the weight of the throne. And when the time was right, when the preparation was complete, God moved suddenly. One day, David was a fugitive. The next day, he was crowned as king. What seemed like a long delay was actually a divine process. Some of you are in that process right now. You have received a promise from God. You have felt his calling. You have believed for something great. But instead of stepping into the blessing, you feel like you are in the wilderness. Instead of moving forward, it seems like you are going backward. But let me encourage you today. Just because you do not see it yet does not mean it is not coming. The same God who fulfilled his promise to David will fulfill his promise to you. The enemy wants to use delay. to discourage you, to make you feel forgotten, to make you question if God is really with you. But do not believe the lies of the enemy. Do not let delay shake your faith, because what God has promised, he will bring to pass. And when he does, it will happen in a way that no one can stop. I think of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. God had promised her a son, but year after year passed with no child. She grew older. Her body weakened. It seemed impossible. And in her frustration, she tried to take matters into her own hands. She decided that since she could not see God moving, she would find another way. And so she gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael was born. But Ishmael was not the promise. He was the result of human effort, not divine timing. How many times do we try to force the promise of God before it's time? How often do we rush ahead of him because we do not trust his process? When we do, we create problems that could have been avoided. But even in our mistakes, even in our impatience, God is still faithful. When the time was right, not Sarah's time, not Abraham's time, but God's time, Isaac was born. The promise was fulfilled. The waiting was over. And Sarah laughed with joy because she saw that what seemed impossible was always possible with God. Some of you have been waiting so long that you have started to wonder if it will ever happen. You have started to think that maybe the dream was never meant to be, that maybe the promise was not for you. But I want to tell you today, hold on. Do not give up. Because when the appointed time comes, nothing will be able to stop it. Think of the disciples on the boat. A storm arose and the waves crashed against them. They were terrified, convinced that they were going to perish, and all the while Jesus was in the boat, asleep. They cried out, "Lord, don't you care that we are perishing?" They mistook his silence for indifference. They mistook his delay for a lack of concern. But Jesus was never worried. He knew that at the right moment, with a single word, he could calm the storm. And that is exactly what he did. He stood up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly everything was still. The storm obeyed his voice. Some of you are in the middle of a storm. The winds of life are raging. The waves of trouble are crashing down, and you feel like you are about to sink. But let me remind you, Jesus is in the boat with you. He has not abandoned you. He has not forgotten you. And at the right moment, he will speak and the storm will be silenced. The same God who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel, the same God who multiplied the oil for the widow, the same God who raised Lazarus from the dead, that same God is working in your life right now. Even if you cannot see it, even if you do not feel it, he is moving. There is power in waiting on the Lord. The Bible says, "Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." It is active faith. It is trusting even when you do not see. It is believing even when nothing makes sense. And when the breakthrough comes, you will see that the waiting was necessary. You will see that the delay was not denial. It was preparation. You will look back and realize that God was aligning things perfectly, that he was removing obstacles, that he was setting the stage for something greater than you could have ever imagined. Do not be discouraged. Do not let go of your hope. If God could bring water from a rock, if he could feed thousands with a few loaves and fish, if he could cause a virgin to give birth, then he can certainly fulfill his promise to you. You may be wondering how it will happen. You may be asking, "When, Lord? How long must I wait?" But I want you to shift your focus. Instead of asking when, ask, "Lord, what are you teaching me in this season?" Instead of worrying about the timing, say, "Lord, I trust that your timing is perfect." God does not waste seasons. Every moment of waiting is shaping you. Every delay is refining you. And when you finally step into what he has prepared, you will see that it was worth it. Do not let the enemy steal your joy in the waiting. Do not let him convince you that it is over. God's delays are not denials. He is working all things together for good. And when your breakthrough comes, it will not just be enough, it will be more than enough. It will be pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It will be a testimony to his faithfulness, a witness to his power, a reminder that he is always on time. Your breakthrough is coming. Hold on, keep believing, keep trusting, because the God who has promised is faithful, and he will do it. My friends, I want you to take this truth deep into your hearts. God's delays are not his denials. Every season of waiting, every moment of silence, every trial you have faced is not without purpose. The God who spoke the world into existence, the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who raised Jesus from the dead, he is the same God who is working in your life right now. You may not see it yet, but he is moving. You may feel forgotten, but he has not abandoned you. You may think it's over, but he is only setting the stage for something greater. The waiting is refining you. The delays are strengthening you. And when the breakthrough comes, you will see that it was always worth the wait. So do not give up. Do not let doubt steal your faith. Do not allow discouragement to take root in your heart. Stand firm. Trust in his perfect timing, because when God moves, he moves suddenly. And when he fulfills his promise, it will be beyond anything you could have ever imagined. Your breakthrough is coming. Keep believing, keep trusting, because the God who has promised is faithful, and he will do it.